With candidate Rayford, we move to candidate Gonzalez, and move to candidate Mayoral. Actually, as a matter of fact, Michelle, don't they have, what was the structure for their opening statements?
Yes.
Opening statements first, and then I'll go ahead and queue up the first question. Candidate Rayford?
Hi.
And just before you begin, our timekeeper is here with the blue sheet. She'll hold up a blue sheet, a yellow sheet, and a red sheet that indicates the timing that you have. 1 minute, 30 seconds, and a stop. And they're color coordinated.
So my name again, for the record, is Teresa Rayford. I was born and raised in Portland. I'm running for mayor. You can find more information about my campaign on teresarayfordformayor.com. You can also make donations at rayford2020.com, and that helps our movement move forward. I decided to run for office probably, I would say, 10 years ago because my nephew was killed here in Portland in gun violence in downtown Portland. And as a fourth-generation Oregonian, when you see the generation that you birthed, my brother's son, killed in gun violence in 2010 in a time right after his graduation where we would be thinking he'd be deciding what to do with the rest of his life, we were basically planning for a funeral. And it was at that time that I saw my community come together. And it was at a funeral where we came together. It wasn't at a celebration or our graduations, which are, low turnout because we have bad graduation rates. We're leading the nation in uneducated children. But it was at the funeral where our community came together. And I had been removed from my community for so long to where I felt that if this was the only time that we celebrated life, if this was the only time that there was a gathering in my community, that might have something to do with the circumstance around the violence in our community, around the hunger in our community, around the unhoused people in our community. If the only time that we were assembled together was to assemble because we were discriminated against, or we were being oppressed, or we were being murdered, or we were in mourning, then I didn't think that that was a significant enough investment in community to be made. And when we talk about the investment in community, I'm talking about what is our dream, what is our desire for our children. We're on the eve of Dr. King's birthday, a holiday, I would say. His birthday was on the 15th. We're on the eve of his birthday, a holiday that was made so that we could pursue the dream of his generation. And as a community organizer, I hear the same voices of his generation. I hear the same voices of his parents' generation. And it has to be a time where we stop. And as we do sit on stolen land, we have to realize that the reason that these systems exist in the way that they do, and the reason that we get the outcomes is because they are a standard and they are built on white supremacy. And that's not something that we can continue to deny because the numbers don't lie. Our history does not lie. When we do audits and we want to understand why certain communities are failing and other communities are thriving, it's on the record, the discrimination that exists in our systems and in our priorities. And so it's upon us, this generation, to deliver the educational needs for our children to build successful lives. It's for our generation to be so engaged with policy, politics, and in our communities that we desire and that we thrive on the dream that already should exist for us. But it'll take our entire lives to make it happen. The dream doesn't happen overnight, and the dream isn't something that's just a fantasy. It's something that's a reality that we have to be intentional about building, and we have to make the necessary steps forward. Gun violence took my nephew, but it also opened my eyes up to how politics run a city and how our engagement can make a difference. And I can't get them back. None of the people that advocate for any of the number of movements that we work on are going to get back the loved ones. We're not going to be able to take back the trauma that we've experienced in this country, but we can start building the standard for a better day. It begins with leadership. It's a top-down approach that we have to start taking. In this city, we've depended on the most marginalized people to give us directives. Now it's time for us to become unmarginalized and to dismantle the city as it is and to take leadership. I'm here to move Portland forward. Again, my name is Teresa Rayford. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
First of all, thank you to the organizers and to our moderator, and thanks to everybody here for coming today. There we go. This is going to pop in and out. I'll do my best. I think that it's a fantastic thing, and I'm very grateful to be here with you today, kicking off the decade, kicking off the campaign season, none other than right here in East County. Yes, that's worth celebrating, and I think that it's a powerful symbol to the state of affairs in politics today that we should start our conversation right here in East County. And I think it sets a necessary tone for the campaign, and the importance of what we're starting right here today is not going to be lost on any of us here. So thank you for that. My name is Osvaldo Gonzalez, but you can call me Ozzy, and I'm running for mayor of Portland. I'm the oldest son to two hardworking Mexicanos that raised my sister, my brother, and I as best they could while they were busy working 2, sometimes 3 jobs. My mother picked berries in Salinas, California in the 70s and marched alongside Julio Cesar and Dolores Huerta when it came time to fight for the rights of people in the agriculture industry. My father never spent a day in a classroom and learned to read and write off of technical manuals, became an auto mechanic, ended up building homes. I spent time working with him building homes at some point in my high school years. So I grew up in an environment that wasn't easy on our household, frankly. And we had to learn that everybody in the household, no matter what your age, had to figure out how to chip in. So, when I was 6 years old, I began my first career. I was a dumpster diver. And I used to run up and down the alleys in the apartment complexes just a block away from my house. And I would go in the dumpsters, hawk out all of the cardboard boxes I could get, and any hawks of metal or anything I could take to the recycling center that was just down the street from my house. Because my neighborhood was an industrial waste yard. I lived across the street from a scrap metal yard. There was a mechanic station on one side and a recycling center down the street. It taught me a very valuable lesson in life in those early years. One that, even as a child, we contribute to our household, we take care of one another. But also, it showed me that waste is just an afterthought that hasn't been finished. And I found value in areas where people hadn't. And after a while, just like the cardboard boxes and the pieces of metal inside those dumpsters, I started to feel like I was just part of that waste as well. So that was the early years of my life, and I took that on to really building a way to engage in the system. When I was a kid, it was time to stop playing outside when my lungs burnt. This is in smog central capital of the basin of Southern California. And that was a place where it was a bad time to be growing up and be a person of color. So I feel lucky to be alive today because most of the kids that I grew up around aren't alive today. I went on in my life to get a degree in environmental science. I'm a climate scientist and I have a master's degree in architecture. I spent the last 15 years of my career building sustainable design solutions, helping write the next generation of policies that allow us to address sustainability in the built environment. For the last 2 years, I was the director of diversity for local workforce development programs in the construction industry. And I've worked on bringing opportunities to small, minority, women-owned, veteran-owned businesses and how to participate in our economy. I've been a mentor for businesses, and I've been able to be helping the community in all those ways. I sit on the board of the Regional Arts and Culture Council, the Hispanic Metropolitan Chamber, and I'm the District 2 representative for TriMet. I tell you all of these things because the reason I'm running for mayor is because it's time that we go beyond talking and proclamations and rhetoric and move into action. That's where we are today. Climate change is real. Inequality is systemic, it's been done by design, and time is up on letting that continue. It is amazing to me that we're right here in East County in 2020 still talking about the need for all of these things. So I know that we've got to change systems major, what we're doing, how we're doing it, why we're doing it, and for whom we're doing it. So I'm stepping forward because it's time to get past the talk and put leaders in place that know how to get these things done. Ozzy Gonzalez, and I'm happy to be here with you today.
Thank you.
Hi everybody, good morning. Can you see me if I just stay seated so we don't have to go up and down with every question? Can you all see if I just stay sitting down? Is that accessible for everyone? Okay, perfect, thank you. Yeah, thank you, first of all, to Advancing Collective Equity for your work in pulling this all together. What a great opportunity to come and talk about our shared dreams for a better future for Portland. Thank you, Rochelle. Thank you, Nicole, for moderating. My name is Sarah Iannarone. A lot of people can't say that last name. I'll say it for you one more time, Iannarone. But most people just call me Sarah because of that. My pronouns that I prefer are she, her. Those are the pronouns that I use. And yes, I am running for mayor of Portland. For the last 10 years, my job has been visiting leaders from around the world who came to Portland because they heard something special was going on here. We're a green leader, right? That's what everyone talks about. What a wonderful place Portland is, how livable this city is. Isn't that transportation system great? How many of you are living in East Portland right now? Okay, so a good bit of you. How many of you are transit dependent? Commute primarily by bicycle or can't drive a car for some reason? Okay. How many of you are struggling to make the rent every month because wages are stagnant and housing costs are through the roof? Yeah. So this is where that Portland story that we've been telling for almost half a century now doesn't really add up, right? We've made a good place for a few Portlanders, and it's known as a model, and people want to see, how did you make a lovely neighborhood like the Pearl District? How do you build something like the aerial trail? We would like to have light rail in our city. Can we have, can you show us how you did that? But what we haven't addressed over the last half century is the fact that so many people are being left out of the writing of what a good place is. When we think about the fact that this Midland library, and I love that we're kicking this off at a library because I generally identify my geography by a library, right? I used to live closest to this one when I was living in 148th and Powell. Now I'm halfway between the Holgate and Woodstock libraries, and I named my first small business the Arlena Library Bakery Cafe because I understood that the importance of civic spaces in our neighborhoods is so important. But when we think about the fact that so many people in our city, by virtue of geography, by virtue of the zip code in which we live, either it makes the difference between the good life and the not so good life. It makes the difference between connectivity and a lack of mobility. It makes the difference between access to housing and lack of access to housing. And so one of the things that I think we can do is stop kicking the can down the road and start talking about what are the changes that we can make right here, right now, today, based on what we do best, which is tapping into community to solve our most pressing problems. So I've come out and built a very robust campaign since July of 2019, based exclusively on the premise that Portland has everything we need to begin solving our most pressing problems today. We don't have to wait for the state of Oregon to help us. We don't have to hope that there's transformation in Washington, D.C. in 2020 to help us, that we can begin this now. And so I am running as the first qualified publicly financed candidate in the new Open and Accountable Elections program, which means that I have raised over $200,000 to date to take on one person who's not in this room, right? Mayor Ted Wheeler, incumbent, who raised almost $800,000 in 2016. Over half of that came from just 400 Portlanders who decided the trajectory of our city, essentially, for these last 4 years. I'm here right now because that is not okay. And with the help of this publicly financed program, with the help of a grassroots movement, I've got an campaign office full of volunteers right now, stamping buttons and making phone calls. We can actually take this city back for the people, and that's what I'm here to do. So it's not really about me, it's about you and how together we are gonna solve these problems around inequity, climate action, and really bringing our city together to craft a better, sustainable future. Thank you very much for having me today.
Do I have to use the microphone? It is, and I want to be able to toggle back and forth on my snazzy devices up here. But the microphone is, I think, also picking up my voice. Yeah. If you cannot hear me at any point, raise your hand and say, turn it up, and I will. I'll just pick it up. I won't turn it up. All right, are we ready? Okay. All right. Candidate Rayford, you were not able to grab coffee or water. Can we grab something?
Oh, yeah, I was going to ask my daughter to give me some water.
Perfect.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Oh, no problem.
This works out me and my coffee.
The citizens of Portland have mentioned a variety of issues as being primary and urgent, including housing, infrastructure, and policing. What do you see as the most pressing issues that Portland is facing in the immediate future?
Well, it's pretty obvious to anybody that drives around Portland or walks around Portland or rides their bike around Portland or even the bus. On the sides of our streets and on the freeways and in underpasses and on the outskirts of parks and communities are people living outside, unsheltered, unconsidered, in my opinion. Our direct services are not getting to all of the families that are in need. And one of the biggest things that I thought about is I grew up in Portland. I grew up in a family and in a community where people had 10 to 15 children, and in the houses that we lived in, it was intergenerational housing that was available to the families. So as your grandparents aged, your grandkids or their grandchildren gave them entertainment, and they learned from them. I learned how to read from my grandmother, and she only had a third grade education, but she was able to stay with me during times that our family needed, support. We didn't have to worry about the high cost of childcare like a lot of families do today. We didn't have to worry about not having access to the childcare or, worrying about their children not being safe at home alone. Those are the issues that we're dealing with today. Even when we say that we're building affordable housing in communities, the affordable housing is not adequate for families. And we have families. We're in a community where we have dozens of parks. We have almost 100 parks in the city of Portland. We have libraries in every neighborhood. So that lets you know that when we build this city, we built it with the mindset that we were going to grow families in this city and that those families were going to need access to education and schools and everything else that we would want in order to build a life to where we would graduate, get a job, and then build or buy our own homes and build our own businesses. I grew up in a community where there were mom and pop shops, and so there was always a job available. We don't have that. We're not investing in people in this city. When we look at the people that are outside, and we spend 52% of our budget for the city to police the bodies of people, rather than to put that money into systems that would provide housing for the vulnerable community members, we have a problem. When we do development, and we say that we're building the development so that we can become a global city, it's not a global city when people come here to visit and they're watching the people that we have as residents not be housed. And they're supposed to come here and be entertained and to do business. And then we're supposed to alienate these people and believe that the carrots that are going to save their lives are in jail. I go to all of the meetings that have to do with housing our community members, and we talk about people as if they're the problem. And my God, as a progressive city, the biggest problem that we would have to manage is supporting people. We're not doing that. As mayor, running the city bureaus, having access to the housing bureau, looking at what we're really doing, surveying property that we own, and thinking about ways to rehabilitate that property, to do restoration rather than demolitions, to do development that already exists, to develop the infrastructure just like with the fire departments and with the work that Joanne Hardesty is doing to make sure that our seismic upgrades are done, making sure that that's affordable for people who own the properties out here, that should be available to people that have Section 8 or need affordable housing. We're not investing in the people that have the infrastructure here that should be a partnership for us to provide housing to people, and that is a simple fact. The numbers don't lie. In my community right now in downtown Portland, I see so many buildings that are up, and I know that those are Airbnb buildings because all of the addresses and all of the shifting of movement shows that that's what's happening. And it's so inconsiderate when you have people directly across the street sleeping in ditches, and now we have rocks next to them. Those are not solutions. We know that the people that are in this community, we know now because of the audits, that the people that are living out there on the streets are our elders and they're our children. Look at the numbers, they don't lie. Let's build safety nets for people. Let's make sure that housing is available, not criminalizing poverty. Thank you.
Candidate Gonzalez, the same question. Do you
Same.
need to repeat it?
I'm good.
Okay.
Would you like to have the question between speakers? Sounds like a yes.
Good.
Please repeat the question.
Okay. The citizens of Portland have mentioned a variety of issues as being primary and urgent, including housing, infrastructure, and policing. What do you see as the most pressing issues that Portland is facing in the immediate future?
Thank you. We have major issues. The system is dysfunctional and it's broken. You list housing, infrastructure. We could talk about mobility, jobs, lack of affordability, all of the reasons people become homeless, and all of the challenges they have to find that stability once again, once they've become homeless. I put all of that into the bubble of the lack of conscientious design. What I think we are lacking is humanity and intentionality in what we're actually trying to do. Our government did a fantastic job of creating a horrible system for a long time that was designed specifically to preserve disparity. And we're living in the outfall of that system today. So to shift that system is a major transformation in how we're approaching what the role of government is, what the role of policing is, what the role of the design community is, and the codes that create land use policy. So the way I see all of this is that our priorities are way off, and we are lacking the humanity needed to understand that what Portland will benefit from most is that we are actually leveraging, optimizing the collective potential, the collective ambition, the collective talent and creativity of the people that make up this city. It's amazing to have a city, and there's not many of them in the US, where we agree that sustainability is important, where we agree that equity is important. But we're sitting here trying to figure out how to go about making that transformation. And change is not easy, but it does require leadership that can see clearly where we need to move. And I know I've been in the business of removing waste from energy, from water, reducing carbon footprints out in the world. And I'll tell you, I made a transformation 2 years ago into focusing on people exclusively in the inclusion world, because we were also squandering the people that were in our city. When we talk about filling the jobs in construction, so many living wage jobs that are out there. There was an article today about the lack of jobs in electricians and in living wage jobs. When we talk about those opportunities out here, and we yet have young people struggling to be attracted to those living wage jobs, we have a very broken system. The lines in the colleges are pretty long, but the lines in the halls for apprenticeships are not. Yet there are living wage jobs where they are debt-free options, and they are fantastic opportunities. But we don't have leadership that can steer young people in that direction. We don't have a pipeline of education that helps let people see that there are amazing opportunities on the horizon. We are in the midst of change, transformation of job types, transformation of industries, and we need leadership that can understand how to move us across that bridge. So the way I see it, yes, housing, yes, affordability, yes, mobility, yes, we have to address the houselessness. But behind all of that, we have to recognize that the answer isn't going to come from one person's perspective alone. This is a collaborative experience. And so what we need more than anything is collective understanding and a shared vision of humanity. That is at the core, because our hearts are hurting. Whether you're in a tent on a sidewalk, whether you're struggling in a job that you might not see coming out, if you're in a mechanic in a diesel bus station and you see TriMet electrifying, and you've been in that business 25 years, you don't know anything else, it's a struggle to wake up and say, okay, I'm excited for the future. And if you're somebody out there who's a single parent who has to run 2 jobs, has to take a bus to go pick up your children after school, and you're still trying to be a meaningful citizen, it's a challenge. Yet those are the realities of so many people out there today. And I have to say, it's a failure of our leadership, it's a failure of design.
Thank you, candidate.
Thank you.
Candidate Iannarone?
You can just call me Sarah.
No.
I'm really fine with
The
it.
last name right.
Okay, it is Iannarone.
Okay.
And I have 4 minutes, is that what we're doing? So, I think there's going to be a lot of agreement policy-wise across this table about what the problems are affecting Portland, because they're clear, right? When we're out in our streets, we see them. We see the homelessness. We see the traffic violence. We see the inequality. But I think the difference is how we're planning to go about that. So when we first launched this campaign, the way we did that was we framed it around 3 major issues. And those were dealing with climate change, dealing with inequality, and dealing with the increasing loss of affordability in our city. And the way that we've gone about this is through a very comprehensive community-led policy development approach in which we have brought experts from across the community, frontline communities, scholars, practitioners, elected officials, city workers, to ask them what's working and what's not on this issue, where are we making progress, where are we falling behind, what's working and what do we need to do more of, and what's not. And so what we've come up with is a comprehensive suite of policy proposals that you can find on my website, Sarah 2020, that's Sarah with an H, 2020.com. And we frame them this way. 1, to deal with our climate crisis, we have to think of it in terms of infrastructure. The last century of infrastructure got us into this climate crisis. Our dependence on fossil fuels got us into this crisis. And so what we do in the next half century, in the next century, is not about the infrastructure that we build more of. It's about how do we unbuild that existing fossil fuel infrastructure and use the opportunity to make new investments so that we can actually create economic opportunity, especially in communities of color and frontline communities. I see Commissioner Hardesty in the room. Portland Clean Energy Fund, I think, is an example, exactly, thank you for your leadership on that, of exactly what we need to be doing in terms of how do we take our public infrastructure investments, how do we take our investments in people, how do we rethink revenue streams, frame those around the climate crisis so that we can make forward progress. 2, we need to reimagine public safety. And so when it comes to public safety and policing, yes, Ms. Raker, you're completely right. We are spending way too much of our budget on policing, especially low-income people, people experiencing homelessness and the criminalization of poverty in our city. We need to think carefully about what do we mean by public safety through a public health lens. So what are we going to do to ensure that Portlanders are truly safe? Because to me, 50 traffic deaths last year on Portland City streets is not safe. People dying when people call the police and there's someone in mental health crisis is not safe on Portland streets. So we need to rethink public safety for the future. What does that mean for an equitable, inclusive city? And we also need to think about affordability, not just housing affordability, which is, I'm sure, the primary challenge, but also things like affordable commercial space, right? What does it mean to be able to afford transportation where you live? So making sure that Portland is accessible to the average wage earning family, but also low-income Portlanders, because when you lose affordability, you lose the heart and soul of your city. People can no longer afford to live here, and so your artists, your creative, your small business owners, they're forced maybe not even to the edge of Portland, but to the edge of our urban growth boundary. And then we're actually not even working toward our climate action goals because people are commuting hours back and forth across our region. So these are my 3 primary concerns. There are 3 other policy packages that we're releasing. So one is good government and healthy democracy. So what are we going to do to make sure that Portland is accessible, transparent, equitable, and representative? We're also thinking about a connected city. How do we take technology to keep us connected to each other, to make us connected across our roadways and transportation? And finally, economic development. So what does it mean for us to really move the needle on income inequality between Black Portlanders and the rest of Portland through our economic development tools and investments? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Portland has been described as the whitest city of its size in recent years. What will you do to make sure that all citizens of color, from our indigenous communities to our immigrant population to our Black and African American residents who are all historically disenfranchised, living within the margins, how will you make sure that the city feels safe and welcome in every part of your bureau and in this city?
So the mayor has a lot of responsibility, not just for setting the budget and assigning the bureaus, but setting the vision and priorities for the city. And when the incumbent ran for office, what they said was, my North Star is equity, right? And so my question would be to him, how do we know if we're making progress on that front? What does it mean for us to actually have clear benchmarks, the same way we do with climate action, right? When we decided we were going to tackle climate change, we decided to measure greenhouse gas emissions, and we would use that as an indicator of progress. How are we doing? And if we're reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, then we're making progress. I don't think many people here probably in this room can tell me what the indicator for equity that we're guiding our municipal policy by. You have a good sense of that? Is that clear to you? Yeah, it's not clear to a lot of people. And so I think clarity around what you measure is what you'll get is something that the mayor's office can set from the very top in terms of the policy vision and framework. And that can be on a lot of fronts. So what does it mean to keep Portland affordable, not capital A, like they use from the federal government, this is affordable housing, but what does it mean to keep things affordable, lowercase a? Like what can average Portlanders really deal with and what can we take? What can we tolerate? And also, what does it mean for us to foreground anti-racism, anti-fascism, equity and inclusion in our public policy making? Anti-displacement is a good example. When we're thinking about land use planning, historically we've had a lot of exclusive zoning that was racial exclusion. Well, if we're going to undo that legacy, then we need to undo the history of racism through actively anti-racist policy at City Council. And this is going to be about rethinking how power is distributed. How does our planning bureau interact with communities like Living Cully, like Lentz, like Apano in the J District? Are they really interested in a power sharing model, or are they going to try and dictate to communities how things are supposed to go? These are the kinds of shifts that are cultural shifts, they're policy shifts, they're investment shifts that we're going to have to make over time, but through clear leadership that understands that if we are not an inclusive city, we can't be a sustainable city. And if we're not sustainable, we cannot prosper. So ultimately, it comes down to understanding that inclusivity and equity are the basis of our future sustainability and prosperity.
Thank you. You definitely can, especially if something resonates. Candidate Gonzalez, do you need me to read the question?
I believe the audience would
All right.
like that.
So Portland has been described as the whitest city of its size in recent years. What will you do to make sure that all of our citizens of color, from the indigenous community to our immigrant communities to Black and their African American residents, who are all historically disenfranchised from this city, how will you ensure citizens of color feel safe and welcome in every part of your bureau and in this city?
Thank you. I am so excited that you're asking this question in 2020 in a census year, because we are about to put a big fat mirror in front of Portland, Oregon once again to really test this sentence. Just how white are we? Because in this library we have Vietnamese storytelling, Somali storytelling, and I heard Spanish just in the corridor here. I know that the school system in this area has the most languages represented in a student body. So any way we slice it, that trend is shifting. And I don't think you have to look very deep. We'll wait another 10 years to start to see it. So to me, as someone who's been involved in setting metrics and managing what you measure, I have some very clear standards that I'm going to be applying when I go about forming the cabinet and looking at the agency itself. Public service is number one. And to me, there's no better metric today in this city than language access. We have nonprofit organizations, city bureaus, and even businesses out there that have written an equity lens or an equity policy, an equity strategy. We have so many words on paper about this right now out there. But to turn it into reality, it really comes down to representation. There are statistics out there, and I use this as a diversity director. I tell folks all the time, inclusion is not about bringing the disenfranchised to the table and doing them a favor by letting them sit there. No, 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 no. Inclusion is about doing yourself a favor, your organization, your bureau, your business, your nonprofit, because you have diverse voices at the table informing the best solution. When you look at the private sector, the entities that are outperforming their competitors are the ones that have the most diverse board of directors, the most diverse employees, that are empowering the most diverse set of voices. That's out there, that's proven. So when I talk about the business case for equity,